We're going live. We're live.
All right, we're live. Today is Thursday, March 18th. This is Backdrop Weekly Developer Check-in meeting. Before we get started with the agenda, let's go around really quickly and do introductions. I am Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California, where it is chilly. I'd like to turn this over to Joseph next.
Hi, my name is Joseph Flatt. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm a backend developer, and I've been busy this last week working on things we talked about at Backdrop Live. So, yeah, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim in Deerwood, Minnesota. And yeah, a lot of catching up on work, client work, and cleaning up Backdrop Live stuff this week is the priority. So thanks for everyone for a great event. Back to you, Nate.
Hello, I am Nate Lampton in Oakland, California. And yeah, Backdrop Live was great, and there's been lots of follow-ups from that. And there's some things, but I put them into the agenda, so we'll just talk about them when we get to them. Jen, can we go back to you to give updates from the PMC?
Sure. So thanks to not only Backdrop Live, but Jack returning from sabbatical and a bunch of other exciting activity lately, we are active on a ton of issues in the PMC queue. We have a meeting scheduled, thanks to Tim. So we've got our annual meeting coming up. And there's a lot of stuff happening. So we don't have any announcements right now, but there's a lot of movement generated by the community that we're currently discussing. So stay tuned. Cool stuff going on. Contributed projects also have been really active lately. I think last week we mentioned web form import had a release, but I put it on today's agenda in case we did not cover it. It came out last Thursday. We also have a new module called B, and client-side date formatter were reported this week. So thank you, everybody continuing to work on Contrib.
B is actually not a new module. It's a rename of the B project that was a single letter before, which is the Backdrop console.
Ah, well, I love its cute new B logo.
We're all excited.
Okay, let's see. We also have some progress on backdropcms.org, our official website. Doc Wilmot has been working on this pull request for a while that allows us to put more data in info files. That was merged maybe 2 weeks ago. It's been deployed. So anyone, Doc Wilmot, if you're watching this, who wants to do some more testing now that that's in production, it is out there. So if you have a contributed project and you want to add more info to your info files, you should be able to. Nate, do you want to do the next announcement? You had the agenda.
Yeah, I added this to the agenda. We haven't announced it during the weekly meetings, but we did announce it at Backdrop Live that AltaGrade, a company owned by Alan Mells, has donated backdrop.org, the domain name. So shortening from, or compared to like backdropcms.org, which is what we're using right now. And I wrote a blog post, but really Tim wrote a blog post and I edited it a whole bunch and published it to the blog. It's currently the latest blog post on backdropcms.org, and you can get to it from the homepage covering that. So that's exciting. Exactly what we do with the domain name is yet to be determined. That's one of the topics I think that the PMC will discuss in their upcoming meeting. It's also not quite finalized yet, so we're still in the process of actually getting the domain name transferred into the same provider as the current backdropcms.org. So it's still very exciting that it's within the hands of the community now, and we're working towards putting it to use. All right. If there's nothing else from the PMC or the websites, then I'll just go right into the progress report. So 1.18.2 is the next bug fix version of Backdrop. I've been saying that I think that we should get a release out pretty soon, and I still stick with that. There's a lot of things that are continuously coming up into RTBC or nearly RTBC, and I keep being like, oh, maybe we can just get in a couple more things. But really, I think it'd be a good time to cut the release of 1.18.2 as soon as possible. I say that, but then I'm going to go right into the next issue, which is like, boy, it sure would be nice if we had that fixed, which is the CK Editor maximize button. When you click the maximize button in the editor, it takes up the full window. And then when you minimize it again, it disables the save button on the node form. Indigozella figured this one out this past week, issue 49333, where Indigozella at least made the pull request. It is a pretty simple one-line JavaScript fix, but of course it's always finding the right one-line JavaScript fix. That needs to be verified and reviewed code-wise, but there's a really good chance that problem will be solved very soon. So issue 4933 could use some eyeballs. The other 1.18.2 issue that I'd like to bring up is PHP 8 support, which continues to need review. It's issue 4772. We discussed this past week about these accessibility issues back and forth in the issue queue. They've been moving forward really rather quickly about whether or not they would be able to go into 1.18.2 or 1.19. And from the discussions, it seems like everyone is leaning towards accessibility issues are bugs if our software is not usable to the broadest audience possible, in particular unsighted users or users of screen readers. And so these accessibility issues we're moving towards putting in as soon as possible rather than waiting for the next minor release. So the issues that are moving forward really quickly include the layout UI adding keyboard support so that you can move blocks around with the keyboard. This is one of those classic things where even as a sighted user, having keyboard support on the blocks page is super helpful, it turns out, because it's a lot easier if your block has a lot of sample content to use the arrow keys or shortcuts on the keyboard to move blocks up and down. Doc Wilma also added a helpful move block to top of region and move block to bottom of region shortcuts. It's a page up and page down keys. And that's also really helpful. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. The keyboard support pull request is in issue 4941. It's gotten a lot of feedback, very positive reception from Mustafa Dogan 78, who filed the original issue. And I think everyone is in support of it. The thing that's currently being worked out is deciding what keys do what, like whether it's the arrow keys or some letter keys or page up and page down keys. So that conversation is currently ongoing, but the code looks really great. It's been tested, and I think that one is very close. Next up is ARIA Live announcements, issue 4985. This one also is a ridiculously simple new feature capability for Backdrop that I think also, let me check its state here, I think also is in the state of needs review, but it's looking really good. I think ideally what we would do is merge this one first, 4985, and then the previous issue, 4941, could then utilize it to describe what's happening as blocks are moved around, because otherwise it's not clear just by the DOM being rearranged. Like, it's hard to describe what is happening on screen without any kind of, like, there's no label changes. It's just like the blocks are moving around, and we need a way to describe that audibly to screen readers. So issue 4985 adds a new API that makes it so that Backdrop can just say things through JavaScript backdrop.announce, and then it will just read things aloud to the screen reader as they happen. And then lastly, the permission page checkboxes are not accessible. So this issue 4987 adds ARIA labels to the checkboxes on the permissions page. Apparently, screen readers have been treating the permissions page differently, and this pull request that's currently on there, I filed it, isn't quite perfect because screen readers are doing different things, and sometimes it results in duplication of the role name being read multiple times. So this issue probably needs some work, but it's an improvement over what we have currently, which in some cases makes it so that a screen reader doesn't have any label at all for the checkboxes on the permissions page. So it just says checkbox unchecked, checkbox checked, checkbox unchecked, checkbox checked. And you have no idea what that actually relates to because there's no labels directly associated with the checkboxes. So that issue needs a little bit of work figuring out what works best across all screen readers. Probably would be advisable for myself or anyone that wants to work on these issues to get either a Windows computer or a VM set up that has Windows on it, and then install the NVDA screen reader, which has become the new industry standard for screen readers. Also, based on what I've heard from unsighted people in presentations and conferences, Windows is really the computer or the operating system to use if you're using a screen reader. And so I think that we should be doing our testing against Windows-based computers that have NVDA. I think that is the combination that we should really be targeting for. And other screen readers like Linux has this one called Orca, and macOS has one called VoiceOver. Making sure that it works well with those is a good idea, but our primary target should be Windows computers, which I haven't said that in a very long time. All right, next up, 119. 119 is the next minor version of Backdrop. It will be coming out May 15th, 2021. And new features go in to 119. They need to have an advocate, a person that is promoting each particular issue. And we'll go through the list here of issues that are currently slated for 119 that are not finished yet. Lauren is advocating for fixing this problem or adding this feature that would allow a exposed view filter inside of the media library dialog to find files faster. The issue is 3293. Help is still wanted on this one. We haven't had any progress recently. There are just some tricky DOM and AJAX related issues to get this one working. Next is advanced caching, adding support for cache tags and a dynamic cache max age header, issue 4127. Joseph Flatt is the advocate for this one. It needs review, as it has for several weeks now, I think. Joseph, is there anything else in particular you would like to mention about this issue?
Nope. That's it.
It does look like Herb Duel reviewed the code and looked at it as well. He did post a question, but I think he's mostly just visually reading the code rather than actually trying it out.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't get a notification about that from GitHub.
Well, thank you, Herb Duel, for taking a look. And thank you, Joseph, for your continued work and patience on getting that reviewed. Next up is Jen. Add field has value visibility condition issue 4728. Jen, updates?
No update this week.
Okay. Next up is adding support for relationships to layout contexts, issue 2134. Doc Wilmot has been working on this capability to make it so that you can get things like a node's author as a context inside of a layout if you are starting with the node, like over in the node path. Issue 2134, there's a new pull request, which is very exciting. This issue has been very close. I've been saying that it just needed some minor renaming. The new pull request is up that makes the changes that were suggested, and it needs review. He just put that up a couple of days ago, and so far there hasn't been any feedback yet on the new version. Gregory Klonos is the advocate for this next issue. Merge the update pages for core modules, themes, layouts into a single page, issue 2714. There haven't been any updates on this issue recently. Next is BW Panda. He is advocating for this issue to make a change to the auto linking text filter that prevents URLs and email addresses from automatically turning into links, like providing a filtering option to disable that functionality. The issue is 1926. This issue is RTBC as of about a week ago. It's currently chilling there to see if there's any other last feedback that anyone else wants to provide before that issue is merged. So that will probably go in very soon. It's already been there for a week, collecting last feedback. Let's see, and the next one is an issue that I am advocating for, support for wildcards in deprecated redirects. This is a follow-up from an earlier issue that got into 118, changing some of the last edit links into config links in core. Issue 2833 makes it so that when we have these deprecated paths, if they include menu placeholders or wildcards, I think the last change was menu items had edit in the URL and we changed it to configure. This issue 2833 reworks the way that the deprecated redirects work so that even if the changed paths include wildcards, they are now properly redirected to the new wildcard based new versions. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but it's pretty simple to understand looking at the difference in what we had been doing previously and what the new suggestion is now. That one has been marked RTBC. Thank you very much, John Franklin, for doing all the reviewing on that issue. There's also a change log written up and published, working under the assumption that it will go into 119. So that should be merged in probably fairly soon. Let's see, and then Joseph added a new issue to the agenda as a candidate. Run config creation hooks when enabling a module, issue 3224. This is the first time that we've talked about this during this meeting. So Joseph, maybe if you could give us a sentence or two about what this change is making and yeah, what work needs to be done to make this happen.
So this issue basically, well, this is actually a really old issue. It was reported a long time ago, but I found it because I was working on some things we had talked about at Backdrop Live with the recipes project type. And we had discussed potentially the ability to just make a module with a bunch of config files and import those and have like a feature-ish style of effect where you just enable the module and a bunch of configuration appears on your site. And so far, everything worked the way I expected, except for fields, which have to create database tables per config file. And So what this does is I basically added a module invoke all. So the actual effect in is basically a one-line change to add to run those hooks, which is where the field module actually creates the tables. I did also I had to edit some of the validation in the field module as well, because of the way the code that adds the config from your module works. So yeah, that's kind of it.
Cool. Is there a pull request filed?
There is.
Awesome. So the state of that one is needs review.
Yes.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, that's something that could potentially be considered a bug. I think it might even be filed as such, but I could understand it possibly having repercussions that maybe we want to move it into 1.19 first and give it kind of a resting period while it's in core but not released yet.
All right.
Just a thought. Doesn't
Well,
have to be that way.
That's where it is on the agenda. So
That is where it is in the agenda, but I think it's tagged 118
oh, I see. Okay.
at the moment. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Joseph. All right, next we go into initiatives. So we have three, well, actually more like two initiatives that are underway. The documentation initiative that BW Panda is undertaking that saw the creation of the new docs.backdropcms.org website, consolidating the API site and some of the documentation from the flagship site onto the docs site. Jen, you've been touching on that every now and then. Is there anything that you think that we should talk about this week?
I don't think so. I think Peter has been working on reorganizing the content on the doc site, and we are going to figure out if there's anything else we need to do, like set up new text formats or whatever. That's not done yet. So I don't think there's anything substantial to note.
Okay. And next up is telemetry, which is the initiative Tim is leading. Do we have any updates this week on telemetry, Tim?
No, we don't. No updates.
Yeah, well, we did just run a conference this past week, so I guess we'll let that slide. All right. Let's see. So we had a after talk brought up around recipes, which was again another thing that was discussed at Backdrop Live. There was kind of some interesting things that were brought up. I guess, Joseph, we just talked about issue 3224, which would help facilitate that. But yeah, I'm not sure, Tim or Joseph, if you had something else you guys would like to talk about with recipes. Maybe just recap the concept again on recording for posterity. I don't know, Tim.
Joseph, do you want to, or should I?
You can start.
Okay. Well, I had brought this up mostly to address the issue which Joseph already raised. So, but it doesn't hurt to quick. The background is just that it's from the very beginning of Backdrop. I think there has been periodic talk about this idea of something that might be. Well, I've learned that there are a couple of different ideas. That there's some ideas of recipes are more like maybe install profiles, but for me, what they've been is more like something like features in Drupal 7. Where you can take a specific, an example I always use would be an FAQ, which would involve a content type, some fields, and a view, and package that into a recipe that you can just upload to a site and import it. And I think, I mean, I got the sense early on that config management should make that fairly easy. However, there are a few problems with that process that haven't been addressed, and I don't think that people have really put the work or put a lot of effort into this in the past. But it keeps coming up, and in a recent survey, it was in the top 5 sort of issues of things that people wanted to address. So we talked about it at Backdrop Live. And to put this all in context, Joseph, at some point during our discussion, Joseph just said, well, you know, I have just uploaded and enabled a module that has nothing but config in it. And it basically does what we're describing as a config recipe. Some of us got excited about, oh, maybe this is closer than we thought. I think after Backdrop Live, Laren and Joseph found this issue that he raised and now has a pull request for, which would be a problem with doing it the way, right? Currently, we can't quite do it the way Joseph had described because of the fields. But if with his pull request, apparently that'll fix that, and then we'll be able to. What I would think, what I would like to ask is, what does that mean? So let's say that pull request goes in. If it did go into a bug, if it goes into the next 1.19, is that phase one recipes? Are we done, or what more would be required? And it seems to me that one of the things that has to happen is we need to sort of a definition of these aren't. I don't know if these they're not really modules, right? But right now they would look like modules. So do we need that project type and what goes into that? So I'm just curious, one, how close we are to this actually being sort of an official recipe, and two, what decisions have to be made to sort of make it official, or what, you know, and how does that happen? Any ideas?
So my dad and I have been discussing this a bit in the last week,
Okay.
and we've kind of come up with a few things that we think would be really helpful with this. One of the first of which is the ability to have some like a UI that can export one of these modules. Because then you don't have to mess about in your site's config directory to like figure out exactly what you need to copy. So I think that would be probably the biggest help, because then you could just have a UI to do this. Probably similar to the features UI, although probably a lot less complicated. And then I guess just adding features onto that, and maybe doing what features did, which is having a separate UI for installing things, so that you could potentially let a user turn on a recipe without letting a user have access to the admin modules page. Although that's probably not necessary for a 1.x or like a minimum viable product.
Yeah, having not spent a whole lot of time on this, but my thinking is aligned with you, Joseph, in that like, because these things act like modules, like you would probably turn them on from the modules page, unless we make another UI for it. But features did something similar, where a feature was a module that you turned on, but it also had a UI for turning on and off features separately, which did the same thing, more or less. And yeah, I'm not sure that we would need to make a new project type like under backdropcms.org, but it might be a good idea if we somehow had a way of grouping them or gating them, or at least identifying them as recipes rather than modules. And potentially that could be something like I'm a little bit nervous to suggest this, but you know, that there is a contrib module called recipes or something like that, and then modules depend upon the recipes module to indicate, hey, this is a config collection. And I'm not exactly sure, like, I'm just guessing that there's going to be some kind of smoothing over that is necessary that contrib might need to help with, rather than core solving all of the problems of this. Because I could see things like turning a feature back off. Well, core doesn't remove config files. I mean, it does for, I mean, you can have hook module uninstall, but possibly a contrib recipe module could handle the cleanup problem for you if you turned off a recipe, something like that. because like deleting entire content types isn't something that we normally do when you uninstall a module.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think we can, as an initial thing, we could just say have a key in your info file that's just like recipe equals true or whatever. And any so in your code, you can just look up those info keys and check. And so we could have that as a relatively unobtrusive thing. So if you didn't have the recipe module, they would just act like a normal module. But if you did have the recipe UI module, then it would add extra features. And so you could use the recipes without the recipe UI module, and it would just appear like a normal module. And that wouldn't require any changes in core at all.
Joseph, just to be clear, is the way you're doing it right now, this would only work if you're just adding new config files, wouldn't it? You can't modify an existing config file, can you?
So if you have a config file that has the exact same name as a config file that's already on your site, it doesn't import it.
Okay.
You could have code in your mymodule.install file that checks for certain things and overwrites them if they're there. And you would have to do that if you wanted to change just a single key. So there is some level of needing to have custom code, but I think it's not as big of a task as some people might think.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that because taking this approach, recipes would be modules, that they could do everything modules can do, right? And so I could see something like a podcast recipe being like, well, it would be convenient if I just formatted this one form in this one place and added this extra option. And oh, maybe it would be helpful to have a setting for this thing to turn on and off, and it's not provided by another module. And then it's not really a recipe anymore. It's just a module,
Right.
that includes a lot of config. And well, maybe that's okay. Maybe recipes isn't so much what we're after as it is being able to turn on a module that provides content types and views all together all at once. I don't know.
A GUI module builder.
Oh, interesting. Where recipes is really not a separate thing. It's just a module that builds modules.
Right.
Interesting. Huh, it's kind of fun.
I've been thinking about that and trying to work out the logic of like, okay, you added this field instance, but no module provides the field this field instance depends on. And so I've kind of been building this little mind map of like, this config object points to that config object. And I've got this big tree that I've built out.
Okay.
Or like this text field uses this filter, but no module provides that filter.
Right. That seems to be the one issue that comes up repeatedly, is whether or not is how to handle dependencies, whether or not we would support that in an MVP. Because that's the use case as a field that relies on another module that isn't there. How do we handle that?
Right, and we could have simple dependencies, like say, okay, I depend on this other module, and just put that in the info file for them. But then, I guess if you didn't have that module, what would you do? And the other thing I thought about was, because we already have these functions that will look up projects from backdropcms.org for the project installer. So I was actually thinking of just like on your modules page, when you don't have a module available, it says missing. So it'll have like enabled, disabled, and missing. Just make that a link to the project installer page for that module, because we can already look up if they're there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. Let me ask this question. Are we, I have mentioned on a few occasions that I would consider advocating for this if I understood what it is. Like there was a path forward, right? It's not advocating for a nebulous thing that we don't even know what it looks like. It feels like now we're starting to know what this might look like. Are we at a stage where it makes sense for there to be an advocate for this? Do you think, Joseph?
Maybe.
Okay. Well, let's talk more about
It's
that.
going to be
And
a solid maybe from me.
And I would be willing, I'm not advocating for an issue yet, so I could advocate for this and you could still do the work, but I could help in any way I could, sort of PMing it and testing it and talking about it.
Well, so far, this doesn't even sound like it's a core issue or like a core feature, so it wouldn't strictly need an advocate.
That's a good point.
As being like a 119 thing. However, individual issues that could be peripheral to it, like this run the
Right.
config hooks, might need advocates.
That's a good point. Yeah. It's not is that pretty much most of the thing are more policy decisions, right? Like, how are we going to handle things? If we did like add the recipe true false to the .info file, that's really more of a backdrop.org issue?
If we wanted to filter and sort on recipes, then
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we happen to support additional info now.
Yeah.
Doesn't that include tagging? Or I can't remember, because we could just have a tag for recipe.
That's true.
I don't think that there is one yet. I think there's a predefined vocabulary on backdropcms.org from which you can choose categories and put in your info file.
Okay.
So it might not be very difficult to build on top of that. I don't think that we're actually using those categories yet on backdropcms.org, but we could.
Right. Yeah, we could just add a tag in our info file and then have a view that shows modules with a certain tag on the website, and that'd be done.
So this meeting is still the appropriate place to talk about this. It's just that we might be talking about it in website related development tasks instead of core, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, we do only have a couple of minutes remaining. Doc Wilmot and Justin joined us after we had started. I want to give each of them an opportunity, if they have anything to say or add or ask about, to speak now.
I don't have anything right now.
Thanks, Justin. Hey, Andy. Anything from you?
Yeah, just I did a little bit more work on the, I don't know if you spoke about it, the what do you call it?
Relationships.
Yeah, PR, and then also you reviewed the keyboard move, the accessibility PR. There's just one hold up is the shadow, the focus shadow that I added. Should I take that off? You made a comment that the focus I added was too heavy. I didn't intend for it to stay. I just wanted something to make it obvious while I was testing.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, it's a design question.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if we just made it a little less apparent, that might be okay for the time being.
I know nothing of theming, so if somebody could give me an idea of what would be a good shadow, I think that's the last thing holding it up, so I can just tidy up the PR and finish with it.
Okay. Yeah, so to elaborate on that, when you access or when you focus a block to be moved with the keyboard, we need to highlight it somehow, give it a focus state. And unlike a link or a button that the browser provides a focus state, because we're focusing like on something that doesn't normally have one, we have to add our own focus state to that thing. And so the current pull request adds a drop shadow to indicate that the block is about to be moved with the keyboard. And it's, my words, I said that was a little heavy, like it had a lot of visual emphasis that didn't quite match other patterns in Backdrop. So what should that look like, I guess is the question. Out of curiosity, saying this, Andy, I was just thinking, is there any way, this is a CSS question, probably none of us know, but is there a way using CSS to activate the browser's normal focus behavior that it would give for a link or a button to something else? So I know in Firefox that looks like a dotted line, dotted square outline, and in Chrome I think it looks like a blue highlight around something. And it would be nice if we could just have the default behavior be do what the browser normally does. But I don't know if that's possible. So I would say let's look into that, and if not, let's just go for something. The drop shadow I don't think is bad. It just maybe needs to be a little lighter. And so let's look at the browser default option, because that would require no design decisions. And if that fails, then I'll try to make a suggestion just of something that's a little lighter. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. And one last thing, the same accessibility topic, we have a separate PR for adding the announce function. I don't have anything to add to that. If you want to have a look at that as well, anyone of the core committees.
Yeah, I looked at that one too, and it looks great. I mentioned earlier in the meeting that I think ideally what we would do is merge the announce one first, and then you could build in announcements into the previous one. However, if we wanted to, we could merge the keyboard support also looks great. Perhaps we should merge both of them individually and then make a third issue talking about integrating the two of them. What would be your preference?
Either way, I mean, that sounds fine. And we could even leave the keyboard, what do you call it, focus thing for a separate PR as well, just further work.
Oh yeah, just make a follow-up. That's not a bad idea. It's odd because we're talking about the way that it looks for a feature that is for unsighted people. So the whole thing might just be irrelevant, because unless you're using the keyboard, there's no focus state anyway. Like you just drag and drop the mouse, nothing has changed whatsoever to the interface when using a mouse. So yeah, the whole thing might be a moot point.
So I think for now I'll leave off the focus and just tidy up, and then you can have a look. Somebody can have a look, comment it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Andy. It's the top of the hour. I have to depart for another meeting. So I think let's call it a meeting for today and the broadcast. And as always, thank everybody for joining, and thank you everybody out there for watching. So thank you. Keep on doing the backdrop.